Hello, my friends. My name is Darren Gerdes. I'm just a professor trying to provide context in the war in Ukraine. It is Tuesday, March 11th, 2025, and I'm cautiously optimistic that the first of these four big stories is going to be really, really important. I think what just happened is potentially a very good step. Now, I'm not going to talk about the drone strike that was last night into this morning, Ukraine hitting Moscow. I'm not going to talk about that because I talked about that in the daily brief. And so let's go on to setting the table for the meeting in Saudi Arabia today. Now, before the meeting, we saw posts like this. This is Jason J. Smart. Is Washington moving toward accepting Russia's peace terms? Moscow believes that the U.S. is warming to a deal favoring the Kremlin, cutting aid, recognizing the annexation of particular oblasts, and even backing Zelensky's removal. So that's what it looked like as of yesterday. And then we had things like this. Zelensky was meeting with Saudi Arabia's crown prince. The significant part of the discussion was dedicated to the security guarantee formats, but Zelensky was not part of the meetings. Okay, so he wasn't there. Ben Hodges is talking about Secretary Rubio's comment here, and it wasn't looking good where Secretary Rubio said there's no military solution. Ukraine must be ready to make difficult concessions just as Russia must. And Ben Hodges said, "Dear Secretary Rubio, of course there's a military solution, especially when combined with applying economic pressure, but you haven't even tried. In fact, this administration is doing the opposite, giving all the cards to the Russians." And then we saw this. Rubio also said, I can assure you this, we will not be providing military aid to the Russians. Okay, so that one was promising, one was not, and we'll go on from there. So they actually are going to have this meeting, and before this, people are skeptical. So, for example, Igor Shushko is posting this. Will Ukraine have to thank and apologize to Russia as part of a proposed capitulation agreement? Yes, 42%, 59%. Of course, yes and da are the same thing. Okay. Now, they actually meet. The delegations meet in Jeddah, and here's the press looking at the sides on each side of the table, and they have their meeting. And it turns out that it seems like it was somewhat productive. Okay. Secretary of State Rubio says, quote, Ukraine is ready to stop shooting and start talking, unquote. Okay. Washington will present Kyiev's ceasefire proposal to Moscow. Now it's up to them to say yes or no, says Rubio. Now, here's the key thing to look for. I've talked about this before, and people say, well, you're just explaining away things for Trump. No, I'm not. I'm trying to be fair and trying to see clearly. So if Trump continues to only zig and only put pressure on Ukraine and only do things that are in favor for Russia, like to get them to come to the table, lift sanctions, then you're probably right that he's trying to help Russia. If he zigs and then zags, like if the Russians say, what ceasefire, we're not coming to the table, and then he starts adding extra sanctions or extra arming Ukraine or something along those lines, then it's probable that he's not just trying to help Russia. And I think that's a fair analysis, or that makes some sense. Okay, so that's what we want to look for. Okay, next. Here is Mike Waltz and Rubio talking.
Today we made an offer that the Ukrainians have accepted, which is to enter into a ceasefire and into immediate negotiations to end this conflict in a way that's enduring and sustainable and accounts for their interests, their security, their ability to prosper as a nation. I want to personally we both want to thank the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, His Majesty, for hosting us, for making this possible. They've been instrumental in this process, and we're very grateful to them for hosting us here today. And hopefully we'll take this offer now to the Russians. And we hope that they'll say yes, to peace. The ball is now in their court. And but again, the president's objective here is, number one, above everything else, he wants the war to end. And I think today Ukraine has taken a concrete step in that regard. We hope the Russians will reciprocate.
Okay, so if they don't actually say yes, what will happen? That's the big question, and we'll look at that in just a moment. Here's Zelensky talking about the same thing, and he's explaining for a couple of minutes exactly what happened. Let's listen to this.
I wish you health, fellow Ukrainians. Our delegation has just reported on a meeting with the American team in Saudi Arabia. The discussion lasted most of the day today, and it was a good discussion, constructive.
Okay, so he's saying it's good and constructive, so that's a good start. I'm optimistic after reading everything that I've read about it.
Teams managed to cover many details. Our position is absolutely clear. Ukraine has been seeking peace from the very first second of the war, and we want to do everything to ensure that peace is achieved. as soon as possible and in a reliable way, so that there is no more war. Our, Ukraine's proposal for this meeting with the Americans consisted of 3 points. Silence in the skies, meaning no missiles, bombs or long-range drones, and silence at sea, and real measures to establish confidence in this whole situation in which diplomacy is ongoing, which means primarily the release of prisoners.
Okay, so 3 things were close the skies, no more missiles exchange either side, and same with the sea, and exchange of prisoners between the 2 countries. And that's where they started with. Okay, keep going.
Military personnel and civilians, and the return of Ukrainian children who were taken to Russia. The American side understands our arguments and accepts our proposals. I would like to thank President Trump for the constructive nature of the dialogue between our teams.
Okay, I'd like to thank President Trump for the constructive nature of the dialogue, and there was overemphasized in another place. I'm grateful to President Trump for the constructive conversation between our teams, and they go on, and they actually want to create an actual ceasefire, not just on the ground as well, on the battlefield, that's what came out of this meeting. Note the language, Jane Keefe says, note the language where it's implying that it's Trump's idea for the ceasefire, this proposal by the U.S. to take the first step immediately in trying to establish a ceasefire for 30 days, right? Okay, it's not bad for him to be able to run a victory lap if he can make something actually work, and it's a positive thing. Okay, this is Timothy Milovanov. He is the president of Kyiv School of Economics. He's also a former minister of economy from 2019 to 2020. Okay, here's what he says. Here's his outline of this. First, Ukraine agrees to a 30-day ceasefire conditional on Russia's reciprocal implementation. So it's not just one-sided. The U.S. will relay this position to Russia. Now, let's see what the Russians do, if they actually want to do something with this or not. My guess is, and it'd be interesting to have a poll, I don't know that the Russians really want to do this. And I think they're not going to come to the table without some prompting. And again, look for the zig or the zag. If Trump continues to try to lure them to the table by just sweetening the pot for him, that's a bad thing. But if he's like, okay, well, I'll disarm here's a bunch of missiles that can hit Moscow, or something, some hard kind of thing for the Russians, then that's a different story. The U.S. resumes intelligence sharing and security assistance. Okay, that's positive, but that they took it away to begin with was really, really negative. Number 3, during a ceasefire, Ukraine proposes a prisoner exchange, the release of civilian detainees, and a return of Ukrainian children. That's big. Now, I don't think the Russians are going to buy that. I don't think they want to do this. Delegations will establish negotiation teams to work toward a lasting peace. Number 5, Ukraine insists on involving European partners in the process. That's important. 6, the president agreed to move quickly on critical minerals deal to strengthen Ukraine's economy. Okay, so much the better than I expected. Timothy Milovanov says the Ukraine agrees to ceasefire without any security or any other preconditions. The position of Ukraine has changed. Okay, so I think this is all kind of good as far as I'm seeing it. I mean, it's looking like the deal is going to be a good deal. The restoration of aid and intelligence is great news. I think that the move was misplaced, and while it has demonstrated the leverage of the U.S., it has also damaged the long-term trust between the countries. I think that's actually a very fair assessment. So this damage is now stopped, and politicians may want to convince the public that the real damage was immaterial and there's no blood on their hand. But all in all, it's much better than I expected, and I treat it as a very good progress toward restoring relationship between Ukraine and the U.S. and toward peace. We'll see if it holds. And again, Euromaidan Press put this out. Even if Trump resumes U.S. aid tomorrow, which they put out yesterday, and today is tomorrow, that's kind of weird that I said it like that. The psychological damage of unreliable American support will haunt Ukraine's war strategy, forcing defensive caution where bold counteroffensives once stood possible. I think that's very fair. I mean, I would feel the same way if I was Ukrainian. Okay, now here's Waltz talking about this as well.
The president has made it clear and certainly made it clear to us that all fighting needs to stop. And the Ukrainians have agreed to that proposal. They're ready for peace. And now we'll take that to the Russians and get their response.
Yeah, so we'll see what the Russians actually do. I'm optimistic about what came out of today. I'm not optimistic that the Russians are going to agree to anything. I think they're going to balk, and then it'll be interesting to see what the Trump administration does about that. In fact, here's a Russian MP. Now, he's not speaking for the administration, but Russia will not agree to a 30-day ceasefire because it will just enable Ukraine to regroup and rearm, says Russian MP Viktor Sobolev. Okay, he added that a temporary ceasefire is unacceptable and only plays to Ukraine's hand. Of course, the Russians will be rearming in that same period of time as well. So, I mean, neither side gets a real advantage. Both sides get to catch their breath. But again, this isn't Dmitry Peskov talking or Putin talking. But we'll see what they do. Okay. Now, while the Trump's team of groveling, now this is Jane Keefe, and he's giving some commentary because now there's going to be another forum about this. While Trump's team of groveling sycophants tries to extort the Ukrainian delegation in Saudi Arabia, the adults meet in Paris, stepping up to help Ukraine. That's a bit biased, but I understand the frustration. Okay, we'll just take that with a grain of salt. And what he's talking about is the U.S. delegation was not invited to the military representative summit in Paris on March 11th. The representatives from nearly all 32 NATO states will discuss creation of international security forces for Ukraine at this summit. So they're working down. So it's a two-track thing. The U.S. is working with Ukraine, and now they're about to be working with Russia and seeing how this all plays out, while Europe is trying to figure out how to get some kind of international security force after this is all said and done. Okay. So that's the second big story. Now, Ukraine's people, everybody asks me, like, where are the Republicans? There are a few voices. There's not a lot. Joe Wilson's a very strong voice. Graham generally is, but he hasn't been. And there are a couple of other senators. Here's Representative Don Bacon. He's a former general, which is why he has the perspective that he has. Russia's economy, 1/14 the size of ours. It is all it has is energy resources and nukes. Because of his foolishness in Ukraine, Putin has made Russia the junior partner to China. We should do nothing to elevate the stature of this dictator guilty of war crimes. No G7 status for Putin. So there are some voices like this, but there aren't a lot that have been speaking up. But I see them. I mean, if you don't see them, I'm trying to show you some of these. Now, what's interesting here is here's another one. H.R. McMaster, he's another former general who was Trump's, what Mike Waltz is, what Jake Sullivan is, that occupying that particular position. And he said this: making unilateral concessions to the enemy was the hallmark of the misguided policies of the Biden administration. That naivety should not be repeated today. And we'll see if they're going to make more concessions or not. Now, I have a third big story, and that's this. So I hear a lot of this kind of question of, like, why is Trump picking people like the people that he picked around in his second term? Like in his first term, his Secretary of State and his the Secretary, let's go with Secretary of Defense. His Secretary of Defense was General Mad Dog Mattis, a 4-star Marine Corps general. This time he picked a major who, I mean, he's a good guy, I guess, but he's picked a kind of guy that, like, you feel like if you skipped a few steps in Pete Hegseth, like, maybe you should have gotten at least a general or something before you're in charge of the whole Department of Defense. Let's put the best face on it, but he skipped a few steps. Why? Well, I just figured it out. Victor Davis Hanson explains this, and he's a big Trump fan, but he explained this, I think, very well. Listen to this.
2017 to 21. So he was in there at the first time, and all of a sudden he didn't know anybody, and they all came to him and said, we're going to have these. So it turned out that Rex Tillerson almost immediately said that he was an idiot and that he knew better about foreign policy. I know Jim Mattis, I like him, but his idea was that Donald Trump didn't understand NATO and all these things. I am a great friend of H.R. McMaster, so I don't include him in it, but his replacement, John Bolton, basically said Trump doesn't know what he's doing. So he said, this time, I'm not going to have...
He being Trump is now Trump used to say, I'd get the very best people and we do this great job because I have the very best talent. And he had the best talent in 2016. And now he replaced expertise with loyalty. Listen.
Have to have all this internal dissension, number one. Robert Mueller said under oath he was the special counsel, but he had been FDI, that he had no idea what the Steele dossier, I don't know what it is. I don't know what fusion. Those were the catalysts for his appointment. His successor, James Comey, said 245 times, I don't know, I forgot, under oath. His successor, Andrew McCabe, lied 4 times to a federal investigator. Bill Barr should have charged him, but he said, you know, what good would that do? So Trump was saying these people with all these sober and judicious, they're politicized, they're weaponized, they're incompetent, they're dangerous. So I'm going to get people who are loyal. We're not going to have the mess of the first one.
Okay, so they're incompetent. No, they're very competent, but they were more competent than he was, and he doesn't want that competence there. He wants loyalty to do what he asks them to do. So I think that answers that question. Last big story is this. You can't make this up. Armor plates, this is out of Bloomberg, armored plates for U.S. Army vehicles never passed required test. So you can't make this up. Sanctioned Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich owns a steel plant in Oregon that supplied faulty armored plates for the U.S. Army. What on earth? All right, and you can't blame Trump for this one either. This preceded the Trump administration. Anyway, all right, that's all that we have, my friends, here. I'll leave you with this from my Ryan Macbeth. Did you even say Sukran? Dude, why aren't you wearing that? I pronounce it. Hold on. I learned how to pronounce this.
Thobe.
Thobe. Dude, why didn't you wear a thobe? Do you even own a thobe? That's, I think, this outfit. And he said, also added the comment, do you even say shukran? Which is, I looked that up too. That means thanks or thank you. All right. That's all, my friends. That's all that I have. Thank you for the time, the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.